The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
Alrighty, everyone. Good afternoon, evening, morning, whenever you're listening to this and or watching, and welcome to the Whitfield Report Labor Day edition, I guess. Happy Labor Day if you're watching on Monday. I'm Sam Whitfield, and we've kind of been on a hiatus from the Monday show for a while. Everyone kind of being on vacation and whatnot. But as promised, we're kind of resuming the author series and interviewing. And joined today is a first-time guest on the show, but someone who has actually been on the show before. Only his episode didn't air. Grayson Sullivan is joining us. Well-regarded Pulp author from the men's adventure fiction genre. And that whole, I guess, society or whatnot that I'm affiliated with as well. And, Grayson is popping up everywhere. He's been published in Savage Realms. He's published his own novella. He's very much into the sword and sorcery genre, which I'm very excited to get into. And he's one of the biggest hype men just for other writers that I can think of. So it's an honor to have him. Grayson, welcome to the show, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me. And that's some high praise you just laid down. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, you deserve it. It's interesting because for the viewers at home, like Grayson and I, we talk almost every day in the Men's Adventure Fiction Discord, and yet we haven't actually talked much on the podcast, so it's thrilling to have you on and discuss things that I know we've discussed offline, but just to recant. So
happy to be here. Sorry about my camera. It's glitching for some reason. I don't know what that's about, but I'm here.
I mean, green screens are weird, but technology, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So anyway, just kind of to start off, Grayson, I guess just what is your general background for those who don't know you, and how did you get started with, both as a writer and kind of just as a reader? What's your, I guess, background as far as that whole thing goes?
Well, let's start with the reader part. I really wasn't much of a reader growing up. I was a movie kind of kid and video game kid, I'd read books here and there. I read The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood or Red Wall series. I read The Hobbit, read The Lord of the Rings when I was in middle and high school. Pretty typical nerdy stuff, I guess. I was into comic books and all that. My dad grew up in the 1940s. I was born late in my dad's life. So he introduced me to all the stuff he grew up with. So I was introduced to The Shadow. He came home one day with this big case full of cassette tapes, and it was the old Orson Welles Shadow radio show. And then the Shadow movie came out in the 90s, and we watched that together. My dad introduced me to The Rocketeer, to Indiana Jones, to Star Wars. He introduced me to King Kong. He introduced me to Godzilla. He introduced me to James Bond. He introduced me to so much of this great American heroism in our fiction, right? Like Batman. My first Batman was Adam West Batman. My first Superman was the old Fleischer Studios animated Supermans, because those are what he grew up with. But then I also grew up with stuff in the 90s. So I had Batman the Animated Series, I had Power Rangers, I had The Legend of Zelda, I had all the stuff that we really loved and adored, Jurassic Park. So I
Yeah.
had this really cool bowl of influence in my life, I never really thought I'd be a writer. I always loved storytelling. Like, I would watch the director's commentaries on movies and listen to how they broke down their storytelling. I would watch all the behind the scenes stuff. I would study story structures because I was a theater kid too. I was really into Shakespeare when I was in high school. Committed large swaths of it to memory, even because I was just so into the idea of storytelling. So studied all this stuff growing up, loved every bit of it. Never saw myself as a writer. Tried to get into short film making, and it never happened because you need money, you need a crew, you need talent. And I'm kind of one of these people that's like, if I don't do it decently, then I'm just not going to do it. That's just my
Yeah.
mindset. I'm not going to produce that terrible YouTube video that everybody cringes at. Like, it needs to have some sense of quality to it if I'm going to
Right.
do it. It needs to come across like, yeah, I may be low budget and it may be rough around the edges, but I do know what I'm doing, at least. So tried to get into that and never did. Now, a couple years ago on my anniversary, and it's actually this week is my anniversary, 9 years married. So I guess 7 years married, 2022, 6 years married, something like that. I'm bad at math.
So am I. That's why I'm a writer.
Yeah, that's why I'm not like an engineer making a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
But a couple years back, my wife and I went to Dallas. We live in Texas, or we're both Texan. I grew up Texan. We've lived all over the country, but a couple years back, we went to Dallas for our anniversary, and we went to Medieval Times, which is really cool. I'd never been. Chicken with your hands, and you drink Pepsi out of a goblet, and you watch two knights joust each other, and it's dinner theater, and pretty cool
Awesome.
experience. Kind of cheesy, but cool. And on the drive home, I tell my wife that I could have come up with a better story because they have like a whole story that they tell. My wife was like, "You could have, and I don't know why you don't." And I was like, "What do you mean?" She said, "I think you should start writing." So I came home, and about a month later, I had a novella written. First thing I'd ever written. I loved it, but I knew that my skill set wasn't where it needed to be. So I took a long time, about a year and a half, to just write. Wrote short stories, participated in NaNoWriMo, wrote a novel in 17 days, which is crazy to even say, but I did it. And then
Yeah.
then I took my novella, the very first one I ever wrote, and word for word from the ground up rewrote it. And that's what I have right here. This is my first published work, The Known World of Atera, The Prisoner of Ruhak Tower. I even drew a little map. Where'd it go? There it goes. Drew a little map to put into it. I'm a floating head. Anyway, so it's a real short, real quick read, which is in keeping with Sword and Sorcery. Sword and Sorcery tends to be short in its length. It's very action driven, and you can really sustain action for only so long before it's kind of, redundant, which is why a lot of adventure books, you read James Bond, they tend to be quick books. You read, any of these guys. Fire in the Tall Grass by Luke Goodish, who we both know. Great book. Pretty short, not much longer than this. It's just hard to sustain action pacing for longer than, so many thousand words. So you really
Yeah.
want to end it around 50,000, 60,000, if not sooner than that. Sword and Sorcery really works for short stories. That is to say.
Well, so just to kind of, I guess, interject here, we, again, we talk fairly often, offline. But one thing I've noticed with you and several other guests, who I've had who are kind of around our age, who are authors, is I certainly, this is kind of, my story as well. None of us really grew up reading for pleasure, so to speak. And in fact, I think I've shared this. I don't know if I've shared this story with you. I think I have, but I grew up playing, much like you. I grew up, with Batman the Animated Series and comic books and all these other stuff. And I was also a gamer. So, but I also, I don't know, I wrote short stories like starting from the time I was like, 10. But as far as like getting them published or something, like I never, no one in my family was like a published, author, at least as far as like fiction. What my grandfather actually wrote like a business book, uh, um, for like on human resources, but like that was, um, that was like entirely different. He was actually the one later on in life that kind of encouraged me to start like writing, and who encouraged me to self publish, later on. Anyway, one of the things that I kind of find interesting is growing up, I never really liked the young adult novels we had growing up because a lot of them were like, a lot of them I guess felt long, and they weren't really getting, and it was too slow paced for me. And I had more than a couple of teachers being like, these dang millennials, they don't they don't want to read books. They just want to, play video games and, watch TV. And they were very dismissive, especially like, of kind of, men. So like, so for a long time, I was kind of like, well, reading is for snobs.
Feels that way, huh?
And then, yeah, and then kind of like, and then like between my junior and senior year, I took a gap year, and that's when a friend of mine was like, "Hey, I think you might want to read like the Mitch Rapp series, by Vince Flynn, which those are like longer novels, but it's like, okay, well, I don't have anything else to do in this, gap year, so I might as well." And I'd read some of the James Bond, books like in high school, but like Vince Flynn's books, it was kind of like, wow, I'd love to write in this style. So like you, I wrote a short story and just kind of put it out there like on Amazon Kindle, and it didn't sell like at all. That was in 2014. That was also kind of around the point when like self-publishing was like nobody really knew what it was, and it was like also if you were self-published at the time, it was like, oh well, he's self-published, like he's not really
Yeah.
an author. And so then during college, like I was actually a technical writing major, so like I was writing for business, but I also took like a lot of creative writing classes and screenwriting in particular, and I kind of started to like, get better at like, crafting stories, crafting narrative, and just improving everything. And then I graduated in 22, and right after kind of COVID, and the job market in technical writing really was not great. Still isn't really, unless you're like a freelancer, which is what I do now. But I was kind of like, well, I'm like, again, I might as well rewrite this short story, uh, since, since I don't really have anything else to do. And I wanted to write during college, but I just didn't have, ironically, I didn't have the time to free write because I was, writing all the time for like academic papers and whatnot. Um, I kind of just published a, you know, I wouldn't say rough draft because it was more like a second draft, but I just kind of, put it out there, and that's Shadows of Deception, the first book, which in hindsight, like, should not have sold, like, well at all because there were errors, and, like, I didn't, like, I hadn't, like, I hadn't, like, nailed down my style yet. I think people bought it because it was like, holy crap, Sam just published a book, and it was like, it was more like out of curiosity more than anything that people bought it, and I'm incredibly, you know, grateful. But it's like, you know, even so, like I got lucky. And then, you know, I just kind of started writing the series and ran into Luke on Instagram. Never saw like any of his ads or anything. He actually found me, and I found him, found Nathaniel, and the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel you, man. Yeah. It's really like it's hard to go back and look at stuff you've already written because every time you write something you grow up a little bit more and you go back and look at it and you're like, "Oh gosh, did I really write this?" You know?
Yeah, yeah,
Other people may think it's great or terrible, but you always look at your old stuff like with this sense of like, "Oh no." Like I thought I had confidence in this.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of like a catch 22, right? Because like when I was writing the first Shadows of Deception, I kind of had this mindset that like I was going I because I kind of wrote in secret and then just like put it out there. Because my mindset was I didn't want to be one of these people who says at like a party, I'm writing a book, and then 5 years later, you're still writing the book.
Yeah.
Whereas like my mindset was, okay, well I'm just gonna write the thing and put it out there, and if it sells, great. If not, though, hey, at least I wrote a book. And once I published it, I was kind of like, oh, okay, I think I actually like this. And it had nothing really to do with the, you know, success or lack thereof, I guess, depending on your perspective. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, I can do this now.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that's kind of what I kind of like try and tell some of the up and comers too. It's even though I am still kind of up and coming myself, it's a weird parallel. But yeah,
Yeah, man. I think it's important that you keep in mind, like you said, you wanted this sense of like, I did this, right? And that goes to the real question, what are we writing for? I'm never going to be Stephen King famous. So I'm never probably even going to make substantial money. So what am I writing for? And for me, the answer is for me, because I love these kinds of stories. This is what I grew up on. And frankly, Hollywood's not making the kind of movies that I want to see anymore. So I might as well write my own. And the other one is, I started writing before I was a dad, but I just recently became a dad. And I
yeah,
want my kid one day, when he's able to grasp and understand what a book is. I want him to walk across my living room, grab a book off the shelf and see my name on it and come to realize that his dad did something cool. So there are lots of reasons we get into writing, and if you're in it for money, you are going to be disappointed and you might be in it for the wrong reason.
yeah, definitely for sure. Well, you know, I'm that kind of, you know, begs the question too. I know you know, one of the things I asked in kind of our last podcast that never, you know, it got chewed up by the cloud or whatever. I'm not sure what happened, but why sword and sorcery? Because that's a very esoteric genre which I like, but like a lot of people, if you go to like indie publisher YouTube channels, they say, well, if you're writing fantasy, you should write high fantasy or something, because that's the number one, you know, best selling genre for indie publishers. And I'm like, okay, well, cool. But like I actually kind of like sword and sorcery better. So what is it about that for you? Was it just what you grew up with, or what speaks to that genre for you?
The stuff I grew up with, I grew up with like probably my earliest introduction to fantasy was The Legend of Zelda. First video game I ever played. I was maybe 4 years old. And it had little sharp-eared Link running around, shooting lasers out of his sword at monsters, and I'm still a huge Zelda fan to this day. Then it was like King Arthur, Sword in the Stone, Excalibur, Camelot, that kind of stuff. And it just, the appeal of somebody wielding a sword and fighting evil just always stuck out to me. And growing up, in the 90s, my parents tried to kind of shield me from a lot, and I'm thankful for it, and for a lot of reasons. And some of it I'm kind of rolling my eyes and going, really, from that? But I didn't get to grow up with like Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't get into Dungeons and Dragons until just a few years ago. But I did, when I was in high school, start playing the Elder Scrolls. And of course, I read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and grew up with Narnia. So fantasy has just always been one of those things that I really loved. And I never really saw a difference in subgenres of fantasy. I guess I was ignorant, but I was like, it's just fantasy. Lord of the Rings and Conan the Barbarian are the same thing. It's just fantasy.
Right.
And growing up, I didn't like Conan at all because I was more into the aesthetic of Lord of the Rings and the kind of story it was telling. But also, the only exposure I had to Conan was Arnold Schwarzenegger. And as much as I love that first Conan movie now, when you're a kid, you see a man in a fur diaper cutting off people's heads in the desert, and it's not, you don't get it. Well,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What was it? Was it kind of like, because I remember watching that as a kid and being like, okay, this is like, my suspension of disbelief was like,
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. Was that kind of the thing for you at the time, or?
Yeah, I think it was that because it was made in the early 80s and for its time it was beautifully made and the special effects were
Yeah.
incredible. But when you're a kid and you've got Lord of the Rings with the CGI troll and the excellent production design and it's beautiful to behold, and then you look at Conan with the big rubber snake, it's kind of like, yeah, forget that stuff,
Yeah.
As a grown-up, I appreciate and adore the movie, but I just never got into it. Well, so I just didn't see a difference. All that to say, it's all fantasy, right? So what happened is my wife challenged me to write a story, and I came home and I plotted out an idea for like a high fantasy story, and about 2/3 into plotting the story out, I was like, this is just a Lord of the Rings copycat. And it hit me. Books like Aragon, which are really good books, are also Lord of the Rings copycats. And The Wheel of Time is a Lord of the Rings copycat. And Elder Scrolls, in a lot of ways, is a Lord of the Rings copycat. And what you get is you start to see that there's this tapestry of, yes, very high quality fantasy, but it's all really just a retelling of the Lord of the Rings. And I was like, this is dumb. If I can't be original, why do it? So I started listening to a few podcasts and trying to develop kind of an original idea. And one of them mentioned Conan the Barbarian, and I rolled my eyes because I'm like, man in a fur diaper cutting off heads. Big deal. And what he described was something I didn't know, and I don't know how I missed it. I thought that Conan was a comic book character from Marvel, and they made a movie out of the comic book character.
Yeah.
This guy's talking about, and I knew about the novels in the 70s, but I still thought it was originated in the comics. This guy's talking about this guy named Robert E. Howard, and how Robert E. Howard lived in the 30s, and he was a pulp writer, and the original Conan stories were just so stupidly good. And if you can track them down and read them, you'll be stunned at how good they are. Now, they got some problems. There's some pretty blatant racist ideas in them, which some people defend by saying it's an ancient world, and the ancient world, that's how they did things. Others say that Robert E. Howard was really just a racist man. There's also just poor depictions of women, which is common in the pulps, right? This is the 90s.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of take the meat and spit out the bones, but I'm just hearing from these podcasts how good Conan's stories are. And they kept attaching the word sword and sorcery to it. And for me, that's just another word for fantasy. And they're like, no, sword and sorcery is different from fantasy. And they explain that it's shorter and it's faster and it's more action-oriented. And the magic is mysterious. There's no explanation for the magic. And if you're doing magic, you're crazy, you're evil, or, you shouldn't be trusted, because magic's almost always taboo in a sword and sorcery setting. And generally, it's just humans. Sometimes there are exceptions, but there's no prophesied hero, there's no dark lord, there's no world-ending stakes. It's a hero, singular, usually a thief or a mercenary or a pirate, sometimes a king, sometimes just a traveler who gets caught in a circumstance, and he just works through that circumstance to its most logical conclusion, and it's just him with a sword up against evil. And I thought, okay, this sounds pretty cool. actually. This sounds kind of like The Witcher, which is very much a modern day sword and sorcery vibe.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
my co-host Morpheus, who co-hosts the live show on Wednesdays, he loves The Witcher, and so yeah, like I've turned him on to some of the Conan
Yeah.
stuff.
And if you read the
So
Witcher books, they're formatted a lot like the Conan stories. The first two, anyways. They're short stories. Geralt gets hired to hunt down a monster. He tries to hunt down the monster. Some twist happens. He's either getting betrayed or there's an evil wizard, and he's got to use his wits and his brawn to get out of the situation. And almost every one of them, right? If you watch the Witcher show, it's like that too. Like crazy stuff. Like he finds a genie bottle in a lake, and some idiot uncorks it and the genie gets out and it's not a good genie and he has to figure out how to deal with it. That's the whole
yeah,
plot, right? So sword and sorcery is just that. It's a very small, tight, personal stakes plot. There's not a lot of globetrotting and that kind of stuff. So there I was. I figured out there was a difference all of a sudden between Lord of the Rings and Conan, and there's a difference between fantasy or high fantasy and sword and sorcery. So I tracked down some audiobooks on YouTube of people reading Robert E. Howard's Conan. And the first one I read was The Tower of the Elephant. And it blew my mind. I'm laying there at like 2 a.m. listening to this story and just like, this is like nothing I've ever read. Like, this is not like Lord of the Rings, which I adore and I love. And to this day, highly important books, beautifully written masterpieces. But this is just different. This feels more like Indiana Jones. I've got a dude who starts in a bar fight, and then the next thing I know, he meets up with this thief, and they agree to rob a wizard's tower together, and all kinds of crazy crap goes down. And before the end of it, Conan's running for his life while the tower's collapsing around him. And I'm like, all this happened in the span of like an hour's worth of reading. Like, this is incredible. It moved quick. It was fighting. There was magic. There was monsters. There was all this great, great stuff going on in this story. And I was hooked. So I just did like a scholarly dive on what sword and sorcery is, and I read lots of it. And I've got some here, actually. I'll make some recommendations to your readers, or your listeners. Robert E. Howard wrote Solomon Kane. He created the character. Puritan that fights demons. Awesome, right? And this is really where sword and sorcery came from. This and another character he made called Kull. He just took historical fiction, mixed it with H.P. Lovecraft's horror, and infused it with adventure. And then what you get is sword and sorcery. That's all it is. And that followed with Conan, his most famous and, you can't see it, most famous, most popular character. There it is. Come on. Anyway, Conan. And this comes in 3 volumes if you wanted to read all of Conan's work. He wrote one Conan novel in his life, and it's in these volumes, multiple novellas and short stories. He was inspired by an adventure writer named Harold Lamb. He didn't write sword and sorcery. There's no magic in these stories, but they're some of the best adventure stories you'll ever read. It's a Cossack. He goes across the Middle East, gets involved in Iraq and Iran, travels up toward China, finds Genghis Khan's tomb. And this is a thick book, man. But it's awesome. These stories are just freaking awesome.
yeah,
And then there are other writers. I dove into all this and studied all this stuff. There's a guy named Fritz Leiber who wrote Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, a thief pair. And he's the first person that ever used the term sword and sorcery. And his writing leaves a lot to be desired. I don't love his style, but his stories and his characters are so cool. In fact, I have a graphic novel. Come on. There it is. Mike Mignola did the artwork. If you know Hellboy, the guy that did Hellboy did the artwork for this graphic novel. And he very faithfully adapts a bunch of the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories. And they're just thrilling. It's just adventure stuff. It's just people. One of my favorite stories in here is they're traveling somewhere and they hear this howling. And the next morning, one of them wakes up and his friend is gone and there's a tower off in the distance. He goes to the tower, and the tower is like this weird portal between the land of the living and the land of the dead. So he has to traverse into the land of the dead to get his friend back. It's like the coolest thing ever. So I'm like, you don't get that kind of stuff with Lord of the Rings or with Narnia, which, again, they're amazing. You just don't get that sense of high adventure and excitement. You get a sense of beautiful poetry, excellent world building, incredible noble characters. You get a lot of allegory, a lot of lessons on the nature of the world and right and wrong. But you don't get that Indiana Jones running from a boulder because the little golden idol set off a trap. You don't get that
Right.
from high fantasy, but you do from Sword and Sorcery. So that's what inspired me to get into Sword and Sorcery. And I've published several on my Substack, a couple of Sword and Sorcery-ish stories. I have one that I put in like an ancient Greek setting, fictionalized. I've got dozens and dozens of stories sitting on my hard drive, and a Sword and Sorcery novel, which hasn't been published. But I do have my novella, which is free, or it's available on Amazon. I've also been published, like you said, in Savage Realms. I have a short story in here that's Sword and Sorcery. It's just my jam. I don't know what to say. It does it for me. It scratches that itch. It's not.
Yeah. I can totally relate. Yeah, and I mean, I'm really, as we're discussing, like I can notice, like I've noticed like a lot of parallels between kind of your genre with Sword and Sorcery and mine kind of with the political, thriller genre. I read like Tom Clancy, I think once in high school. I was kind of I liked it, but I was kind of like, you know, I was like, oh man, I'll never be able to write a political thriller like this if I ever write one, because those books are, the original Clancy books are like 800 pages, you know, like they're tomes, and so in my mind, I thought that I just thought that, well, that's how thrillers are.
Yeah.
So they're so detailed, and they have to be because of all the political intrigue that they just demand that amount of depth. And then I remember my uncle who has since passed. He was the one who, like I said, I was a big Bond fan growing up, but it really wasn't until I was like 13 that he actually recommended that I actually read, the Bond books. And I read Casino Royale, and I'm like, wow, this is way different than, movie Bond. And at the time I had read it, Daniel Craig had just become Bond too, which makes me realize now that that was 20 years ago when I first read that
My
book,
gosh.
and that's holy crap. We're getting old, Grayson, but
You're telling me, dude, I'm about to be 40 in a few years. Everything hurt.
I just turned 30. But I digress. I mean, book Bond is different from movie Bond. And yeah, I mean, I know that we've had debates over Bond's character in the in the Discord and whatnot.
Yeah, some good debate about it. Yeah.
What I find interesting though is in doing research about Ian Fleming and doing research about you know some of the characters who I guess influenced James Bond. Ian Fleming was actually part of like naval intelligence during World War II, and he was also a journalist. He wrote James Bond because he was like in his 40s, and he hadn't met um you know he hadn't met a woman until later in life. He claimed that the love of his life, who was like a nurse, that she was killed on a Navy ship that I think the Germans bombed or something.
Mm, tragic.
Yeah, he was very much a lonely man kind of, and so I guess that kind of influenced maybe his you know take on women, which as the books go on, quite as rough around the edges, but that those first few kind of are. I mean, it's interesting because when you talk about like race or anything like that regarding that time. It's always interesting because it's like you have to. I'm not saying that like all of the behavior is excusable
No.
per se, but it's like you do kind of have to like look at things within in the time where it's like yeah, Ian Fleming, like you might think that he was a misogynist by today's standards, but in his time, he might not have, he might not have been. And also, like some of the, I guess upper echelon of like Great Britain, like some of the women like looked disdainfully towards him because he wasn't a noble or something like that, or
Yeah.
I mean, just all that sort of stuff. It was just like a different time frame, and it's like, well, these character flaws, they don't make people bad, and they don't make people good. It's just kind of, it is what it is, and people are flawed, and authors are flawed.
Yeah.
So
My thinking, I somewhat agree about you have to understand its context. Robert E. Howard lived in Texas in the 1930s. I don't know what you expect from this man. Do you
right,
expect him to, do you sincerely expect a man who lived 100 years ago to measure up to our current moral ideas? Like, that's not fair. It's just not, it's not right morally in and of itself to expect that, nor is it fair. That doesn't excuse anything. The man had blind spots. Society back then had blind spots. You go back 100 years before that, there were even more blind spots. And 100 years before that,
yeah,
way more blind spots. So it's evidence that we've moved forward as a society, which is a good thing. And that we're standing on his shoulders to get here, which is another good thing. So it doesn't excuse, but you have to be able to look at it with some objective understanding. You also need to be able to realize that 100 years from now, people are going to look at us and go, oh my gosh, weren't they aware of what they were doing? Don't they see the harm they were causing? Don't they understand that they were mistreating people? And in our context, we're going, how? Right?
right,
So you have to have humility if you're going to have these discussions. So I'm sure Fleming had reasons for doing what he did. Do I agree? No. Do I appreciate the way he always wrote about women? No. Do I still like James Bond? Yeah, it's thrilling. It's fun. I can objectively reason this was the 1950s and 60s. This dude had a perspective that I don't share, but these stories are fun and I'm going to enjoy them. And if you can't do that, then how do you interact with anything in your life? How do you interact with the news on a daily basis? How can you sit here and say you support Coke products when you know that Coke has a history of using sweatshops in China? Like, if you cannot objectively consider and think through and acknowledge people are flawed, things are flawed, I can still enjoy flawed things. If you can't do that, how do you survive in the world? So that's my perspective on it, and I'm not mad that people get hurt over it, For a woman to read James Bond and be shocked is completely understandable. And I'm not going to be upset with her or blame her for that. And if she doesn't want to
right,
read James Bond, that's fine, And at the same time, if somebody takes that as like a role model moment, I should treat women this way, then I kind of want to step in and say, it's good to appreciate Bond's confidence and charisma. It's good to appreciate his daring do. It's good to appreciate the action and all those things. But we really don't need to treat women the way Bond treats women, right? Like that's not something we should learn from that. We should learn to be better than Bond in this area. And we should learn to be more
yeah.
like Bond in this area. If you're not willing to do that, then I'm not sure that you can read fiction with any honesty and get any enjoyment out of it.
And I think that's kind of, I mean, it's cliche to say that art imitates life or life imitates art, but he does, at least in the books, he does change, as other
Some
authors
growth,
have
sure, yeah.
taken him. It's also weird because it's kind of and same thing with like Conan and other characters, like different characters are kind of readapted to fit their times, right? But like, we want to talk like the negative of all, of all these, heroes, but also like, there's also like a lot of positives too. Like, one of the things that I think is really kind of, I'm not saying every show does this, but a lot of books and a lot of modern characters, they spend an inordinate amount of time like talking about their feelings, and not necessarily like in a constructive way, but it's like
Yeah,
they
yeah,
they talk about their feelings and then have a scene where they're talking how they just talked out their feelings, and it's like, well, you're just double, you're just kind of, breaking down what we already saw,
yeah,
or something. There's just like what I find kind of, I guess, problematic with a lot of like Hollywood writing and a lot of like big publishing writing is it's dumbed down to,
yeah,
because they think that that will be more accessible to, I guess, a broader audience who, honestly, I don't know if the demographic that they're going for, and I'm not naming anyone specifically, I'm just saying in general, sometimes I feel like some of the big publishers are trying to just like go for any demographic, right? And they're not, they don't really
yeah,
even know who their audience is. I'm not whereas like I'm not writing for everyone. I want anyone who wants to read my books to have the option. But if I'm trying to appeal to everyone, then,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. And I'm a marketing major, and one of the simplest lesson I can give anybody on marketing is that marketing is a reflection of your values. Like, you are telling the world what your values are. That's all marketing is. When you look at
right.
recently, the big scandalous news story was Cracker Barrel, right? So what's Cracker Barrel's values? Country food, a nostalgic southern antique environment, humble blue collar people. That's what their values have been, and that's who they market to, and that's who, by and large, with some exceptions, goes to their restaurants. It's people who listen to country music, and they probably lean a little bit conservative politically, and they probably work blue collar jobs, and they might just have grown up in the country, and Cracker Barrel reminds them of grandma's house. That's who they're trying to reach. And when they did their rebrand, the reason it backfired is because they forgot this golden rule of marketing, that marketing is about reaching people according to your values, matching their values. So when they tried to make Cracker Barrel for everybody, they lost their customer base overnight. They lost $200 million overnight, precisely because they didn't understand you have one market that you're reaching, one group of people. This cannot be for everybody, right? White collar New Yorkers who have never spent a day south of the Mason-Dixon probably don't care about Cracker Barrel. They might try it and enjoy it, but is it going to be their number one place? Never.
That
Inner city people from Chicago who grew up poor, who grew up under racial discrimination, Cracker Barrel's probably not their place, right? They might try it, might even enjoy it. Still probably not their place. And the same thing's true with our books, you know?
Yeah. I mean, even more, even more blatant with, Budweiser. I know that
Mm-hmm.
you're not as much of a, a drinker. Put all that aside though. Like Budweiser, when you think of that brand, you think of, just like an all-American beer that is, it's not really supposed to be political or controversial. And I think the big controversy with that was, a couple things. Regardless of how you feel about the transgender issue and whatnot, the particular person that they chose to represent is very polarizing. And almost intentionally so. And I don't believe that they were aloof to that either, or that they didn't know. So it wasn't like people were like, people weren't saying no, trans people can't drink beer. I don't it's like I don't think a lot of people cared, but it's like, well, now it's like the way this person is presenting the thing is like, you're making Budweiser a political thing now, and I don't like that, because everything's political. I can't even drink a beer now without it being
Yeah. And again, it's a
thing.
matter of values, because when you think Budweiser, who do you think is the primary target audience for that? It's probably a blue collar worker, or maybe a white collar worker who grew up, hunting, fishing, boating, camping. You're probably thinking of somebody who listens to Southern rock or country music or classic rock. You're thinking of somebody who watches football and
College frat boys who, I will say that there are negative connotations with that, but like, also a lot of my friends, are well, not anymore because they've graduated, but they were frat boys, and that they're awesome guys. There's just that negative stereotype, and
yeah.
so
So
yeah,
it's
I mean,
just
it's just
it's a weird thing they do with marketing, and they're doing it with movies too, trying to
yeah,
make it available to everyone. And it's like, everyone should be able to approach this and enjoy this in some respect, but it can't be
yeah,
for everyone, right?
right, exactly.
Same thing with Robert E. Howard with his views on women and race. It's like, I don't approve necessarily of a lot of what is going on there. But as somebody who even doesn't approve of that, I can approach and enjoy Conan for what it is. I can do it. And to your point earlier about the navel gazing in a lot of modern stories, just the constant inward focus, right? You got this character, he's 12 pages of him thinking about himself, right? There's a place for that. But for my purposes, I'm going to point at a Conan story and tell you how you can have that, but it's not the focus. It doesn't take 12 pages. There's a story he wrote called Queen of the Black Coast, and in this story, Conan falls in love with a pirate queen in the most barbarian way ever. She raids the boat he's on. He starts cutting down people with his sword, bloodbath. Everybody's dead except Conan, and he's drenched in his enemy's bloods and holding his sword, and he's just cutting down one person after another. And this woman walks up to him and does like a mating dance. And of course, he's a barbarian, so he's like, oh, he puts his sword down and they embrace, fall in love, and in true pirate barbarian fashion. And it's ridiculous to say it out loud, of course, but they spend their honeymoon looting and pillaging. And they find this old temple in this ancient city in the forest somewhere. And Conan gets a whiff of this plant that causes him to pass out. And when he wakes back up, she's dead. The pirate crew is dead. And there are monsters that did it. So he goes to kill the monsters, and he gets like in a situation where he's about to die. Chick's ghost manifests, kills the monster for Conan. And how does Conan respond? The story ends with him standing on a beach, holding her sword in his hands. He sets the boat adrift with her body on it and lights it aflame, and he has his moment of, that was the love of my life, and I've lost her. Not 12 pages of thinking about himself. One moment where Conan is vulnerable, which is rare for Conan,
Right.
where he's emotional, where he is thinking of someone other than himself, which is the love of his life that just died and he lost. He thought he found what he was looking for, and it's gone. And now we have more motivation for Conan to move on and keep telling us more exciting stories, because he's like, that's where his story should have ended. I found my one and only, but she's gone. No more looting and
Yeah.
pillaging, I'm going to go do this now. And I think in the stories, he doesn't even take a queen until he's like 50 years old, because he has other women that he is in and out with. The dude's totally into that. It's just that this is the one that captured his heart until much, much later in life. And you get that moment You get that moment of self-reflection, of introspection, where he's wounded and vulnerable. But it didn't take 12 pages of just self-involvement to get there, right?
Right.
So I think that there's a lot to be said about being succinct, being quick, being honest, but being expedient and remembering who you're writing to. Because this was the Pulps. This is a guy that just got out of the factory covered in dust. He's got 30 minutes before he goes to bed. He wants to read a story. He reads Queen of the Black Coast. So it's all about just knowing who you're trying to reach and giving them what they need.
Well, that's the other interesting thing too that I find, because when I first published Shadows of Deception, the first one, and I started to tell like my IL friends from college about it, they were like, dude, that's awesome, but I'm probably not gonna read it. And I was like, okay, well, why? And they're like, well, I work, or, some of them, I'm still in school, and, I just don't have the time to sit down and read a lengthy, novel. And I'm like, well, I think the first one was only like 100. I can't remember the exact pages, but it was under 200 pages. And they were like, really? You can do that? So I kind of started to introduce them to the Pulp, to kind of that whole thing. And Frank Theodet and I actually talked about this when he was on here. I think one of the things I find interesting is the Pulps are kind of making a resurgence for us, particularly with, men who, like I mentioned, we were kind of bullied by by the snobby teachers who thought that, who think that, literature equals, some 500 page book, and then we have to write like a whole essay on, what so-and-so's breakfast, order means, or, something like that. Whereas like, it's like my book's not super deep, but it's just like a fun read that you can pick up like on Friday, and hey, it's a long weekend, so you can end it on like a Monday or something if you want.
Which is valuable for me because I'm a dad. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to work through a 1,200-page fantasy book or a 700-page Tom Clancy book, but I might work through a 200-page L.S. Goodish book. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's one of those deals where you have to know who you're trying to write to. You have to understand what you're trying to communicate. But like you said, it's this can't be for everyone. It has to be for a select type of people. And they're the kind of that's your market, right? The Pulp mindset for writing, for word length, for the kind of action-centric story is coming back, and it's coming back really hard.
Yeah.
With it is Sword and Sorcery coming back. Sword and Sorcery has been trying to make a resurgence for years and years. It kind of disappeared after the 1980s because there was a slew of trashy movies featuring barbarians in fur diapers cutting off people's heads. So it just people just rejected it. It's like, okay, this is stupid now. It's a self-parody. But it's trying to make its comeback. All these old forms of storytelling are trying to make a comeback. And it's because we've been spoon-fed the same stale cracker over and over and over again. It's like, oh, another Lord of the Rings copy. Oh, another Tom Clancy ripoff. Okay, here we go with another Executioner ripoff. All right, I get it. It's like, and it's just after a while, it's like, so can y'all do anything fresh? And their idea of doing something fresh is, well, let's just disrupt their, let's just do something completely off the wall and bonkers. Let's make Star Wars about lesbian witches instead of Jedis.
Yeah.
And you know what? If you want to tell a lesbian witch story, there's room. You've got all the room. You even have an audience for it. But you took a property that was familiar and comfortable for its fan base, and you did something with it that you knew would be controversial and polarizing, and you did it anyway. So we're just being fed either let's take it and twist it and make it unrecognizable, or let's just rinse and repeat and throw the same thing at you over and over. I think that's one of the pulp stories are coming back because they're simple, they're fun, they're focused, and you're not going to get this sense of you took my toy and you ruined it.
What's funny though too is like I was talking about this with a friend just today. So it's funny you mentioned it's funny you mentioned the executioner too, because the executioner Jake Widmer is the one who, like, I had known about the executioner again from my uncle, and then I kind of forgot about him, and then Jake reminded me of him. The funny thing about the executioner, and same thing with, like, Robbie Howard, is there are all these kind of expanded universes, with the pulps, too, where like other characters cross over and whatnot, much like comic books, right? That's kind of where comics took that route from. But now we have, I mean, I hate to say it because it's kind of, I feel like kind of trashing comic book movies has now kind of become cliche. Marvel, and DC to a certain extent, everything has to connect. Everything has to be like a spin-off to set something else up. Nothing can be its own story. And one of the nicest things that someone said to me is that like I published the short story I published in the Veritas Western thing ties into something in my universe, but yet I've already established with American Instinct. Yet it stands on its own, and it's not, or at least that's what I've been told. So there's a way to do like, setups and crossovers, but like Hollywood just, it's become the thing as opposed to, a method, I guess.
I think you're right. I think superhero fatigue is born from having to keep up with too much and from a stale formula.
Yeah.
Just every movie is the same as the last movie. It's just a different cape, right? You're going to get the stupid humor. You're going to get the villain that has a really weird, nonsensical plot. You're going to get some sort of theatrics and then rinse and repeat. And it has to be connected to this one. You won't understand this movie if you didn't see this movie. And it's just like a spider web of...
Yeah, which that's like the hardest one. I shouldn't have to watch like every single thing to, and so like that's why in some of my books, like even if I'm referencing something else, in previous books, I don't know that someone has read all the previous books, so I try to very quickly, reference something that happened previously in a way that will, it might not rehash it directly, but it'll give the reader enough info to know why something in the past is relevant. And then if they want to go back and, read it or whatever, it makes, more sense. They're not going to be overly, confused.
One of the things I love, and Conan does this, and a lot of the sword and sorcery stories do this, and it's something that with some of my stories I'm trying to achieve, is the episodic story format, as opposed to an ongoing narrative, right?
Yes.
There's place for an ongoing narrative. But if you go back, let's talk about Batman in the animated series one more time. You look at Batman the animated series, what's your favorite episode? And that tells you the story of episodic storytelling. It's not just that you're getting this ongoing arc, it's that you have one singular adventure that you love more than the others. And for me, that would be, I guess, Christmas with the Joker is the episode where the Joker takes over the observatory at Christmas. Like, Batman's fighting like little toy soldiers and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like, let's move on to another one, the Clock King, the villain of the week structure. This is Batman, same setting, roughly the same time period. You're getting, when you put them all together, you're getting a sort of grand story narrative, but they're singular adventures. It has a beginning, middle, and end in one story at a time. And that is, for me, the ideal way to tell a story. You can connect it to what came before, and you can foreshadow what's yet to come. But that's not the point. this episode's about this episode, right?
Yeah.
And when you watch them all in sequence, you get that sense of narrative, character growth, and story development. But if you watch them just as an episode, you still get a full, complete story that's perfectly enjoyable all by itself. You can't do that with Game of Thrones. You ask somebody, what's your favorite episode of Game of Thrones? And they're going to go, oh. But if you ask them what their favorite episode of Batman the Animated Series is, they know immediately because they watched it. They remember that story. That's their favorite one. That's the one they had the most fun with.
Yeah.
I think episodic storytelling should make a comeback.
Or if they're like me with BTOS, because looking back, BTOS also, just from watching it, influenced my writing style immensely as a kid. That's how I got into noir and detective fiction just in general, and
Yeah.
femme fatales and whatnot. All things that I kind of have evolved and whatnot. But to answer your question specifically with that, like, I think, I mean, there are so many episodes, but I think possibly my favorite episode is, looking back now, is Mad Love, which is one of the
with Harley Quinn.
which is one of the later episodes, but like, that's one where it's a self-contained story, but it also goes into the history of the Joker and Harley Quinn, and really how abusive the Joker is. Well, also, like, Harley's not that great of a character. I hate this retcon they've tried to do, where like they've tried to make her like an anti-hero, and they've also bizarrely, I always know when I'm talking to like a Gen Z or a Gen Alpha who hasn't watched BTOS, because they'll say something like, Joker and Harley Quinn are hashtag couple goals, and it's like,
No, they're not. Yeah,
clear,
they're
like,
a horribly psychotic, codependent relationship, and that's one of the reasons I don't think they should have ever broken them up and made Harley independent, because it's like they can't function without the other. They're kind of a different type of Batman Joker structure, because Batman only exists because the Joker exists. That's why he won't kill the Joker, right? The villains justify his existence. If he killed them, he couldn't be Batman anymore. And the same thing's true with Harley and Joker. It's like, if he kills Harley, he's got nobody to abuse anymore. If Harley kills him, she's got nobody to feel affirmed by anymore, because she's hung up on this idiot who keeps hurting her. So I don't think they should have ever taken that aspect away from Harley and Joker, personally.
That is one thing that, speaking of noir, like, Frank Miller, as I've gotten older, is also, an influence on him. I don't really ascribe to anything that he says, personally. I think he's one of those cases where I separate the art from the artist. But one of the cases that he's made, and that a lot of people make, is, I get the whole argument that, if Batman kills, then he's no, like, I get that argument, but there is something to be said for, okay, I understand, Two-Face, I understand Riddler, but there is kind of thing where Batman even admits at one point in various, like, comics, like, yeah, I've kind of killed like a crap ton of people just by
letting you live.
This guy to live. There's actually a hilarious AI thing where the Punisher is even like, the only reason I exist and do what I do is because of, like, extreme cases like the Joker. I'm not here I'm here, like, punishing jaywalkers, or even bank robbers. I'm taking out the trash of the very worst, that type of thing.
Well, again, this is something I think Batman the Animated Series did wonderfully, and it's a Pulp thing. The Pulps came up with this, going back to the 30s, right? With the Shadow or Doc Savage or Conan or whatever. Very rarely in Batman the Animated Series did you see the Joker get arrested. You see him breaking out, but you very rarely see him arrested. Instead, what you see is the
Yeah.
Joker either fakes his own death or just by some miracle gets away. And that's how Batman justifies constantly having to take him out, right? And that comes from the pulps. That's the reoccurring villain trope. It's the whole
Yeah.
he escaped with his life at the end of the last encounter, and he's back with a vengeance now. You know, Conan was a little less merciful in that regard. Conan cut off a lot of heads, but someone like the Shadow or Doc Savage had repeating villains. Dick Tracy did. Zorro did. That's something that people say is cliche and whatever, and I'm like, I think it just justifies you to be able to keep telling these stories with these characters without making it look like, gosh, I wish he'd just killed them. Like, if he's slippery and you can't kill him, then he can come back and fight again, you know?
Have you watched the show Dexter at all?
Man, I got like 2-3 seasons into Dexter and realized yes, he was like killing serial killers, but I was still rooting for the bad guy. Like, this is a despicable man. I just couldn't do it anymore.
Okay, well, I mean, yeah, I get it. I love the Dexter series. The later seasons get a little weird, although this current one is really good. But there is kind of, I don't know what season you stopped off at, but there is one villain in particular, I don't want to say who it is, where it's like, even though Dexter killed this one, like, season villain, there are a few where, like, that villain, even though Dexter killed him, the villain kind of got the last laugh because everything else.
You're talking about John Lithgow, because that's
Yeah.
where I stopped.
Oh, well, okay. As long as you saw the Trinity Killer
Yeah.
season, like that is, you're good to kind of skip the rest of the series as far as I'm.
Yeah. That last scene where, yeah, he killed the Trinity Killer, but he comes home and Trinity Killer definitely gets the last laugh. That was just bone chilling. But that's where I was just like, I don't think I need to keep going with this show. This is crazy. And now he's got a kid. He's gonna teach that kid to be a serial killer. I don't know. Like, gosh, man, this is.
I mean, Dexter Resurrection is really good. Also, though, like that's another thing that makes me feel old. Is like, I'm old enough to remember when that kid was born, and now he's like 20, and now like Harrison's going to call, like,
Dude,
it's like, yeah. So, kind of moving topics though. So, you've written in Sword and Sorcery. I know that's kind of your bread and butter, but you and I have also kind of written in different genres too. Mainly, with this bad boy, the Veritas Western Tales. I wrote my first Western with Night of the Vigilante, but like, again, that was kind of, a departure for me as well. So you and I are both kind of, I guess, experimenting with different genres. Talk about that for you. How does, I guess, changing, do you feel like there's a challenge, or like, is writing different genres harder for you, or what has your experience been?
I've written in a few different genres. I kind of have a tribute to James Bond, Indiana Jones. I don't know if I wouldn't call it noir. It has noir elements. His name's Mr. Risk. I had those stories up on Amazon, but I'm embarrassed by them because they're so poorly. I'm going to revise those things eventually, and because I like that character a lot. But he lives in the 1930s and sits in a jazz club and drinks whiskey and waits for orders to go fight the mob. Like, that's his MO, With the Westerns, I've actually written a handful of Westerns just to stretch my arms a little bit. This is the only one I've got published. But Westerns are adjacent Sword and Sorcery. You could take a Western story. The stranger rides into town on a horse, sees a girl getting roughed up, beats up the dude, shoots him dead in the streets. They try to take him to jail, but he's a wild card and breaks out of jail. And then he finds out the mayor's corrupt, so he's going to go after the mayor, and before you know it, there's a shootout in the streets. You could easily, same story with Sword and Sorcery. It's very adjacent. So it's similar. Now, I've done some flash fiction in other genres, like war or sci-fi, or, I even did a Superman flash fiction about Jimmy Olsen. I think it's important to write outside of genre.
Yeah.
The reason is because it equips you with more tools, right? It teaches you things about writing that you wouldn't learn if you stuck with one genre. right?
Yeah.
So I just recently wrote a noir, a true noir. It's a whodunit detective story. You were gracious enough to read over it and let me know if it was working or not. And it's written in the first person. I generally don't write in first person, but that taught me things about scene
Neither do
description.
I.
Yeah, and it taught me a lot about scene descriptions because it's like from the third person, it's like he did this, he went here, he saw this, this is what it looked like. But when it's first person, it's like, man, I walked into the room and it smelled like rotten eggs. That does something way different than third person. It taught me a lot about scene description, and the pacing is slower with first person because you're stuck in their head. So making that exciting is a bit of a challenge. And it
Yeah.
teaches you more about writing to write in another genre. One day, I'm going to get risky and I'm going to try romance. Not right now. I'm going to do it.
I
I'm going to try it. I've written horror. Horror works, but Sword and Sorcery has elements of horror, so it felt kind of familiar. But horror is all about just building that sense of despair, or that sense of what's waiting around the corner, that just kind of gnaws at people as they read. And that can be difficult to do. It's all about just gaining new tools to help you do your job better. So I think writing outside of genre is super important. And
Yeah, and also like kind of like many of my stories blend genres, even subconsciously, I guess too,
yeah,
which is awesome. It's also interesting because like writing the same character and same universe but in different person perspectives. I'm writing something for Blood Ties, which is kind of my noir kind of anthology series. I'm writing one character right now. I've written stories for him where it's in the third person, right? But now I'm writing him from a first person perspective just to get inside that character's head a little more and kind of like what the audience see what that character is thinking. So always interesting. So
yeah, I think it's just important. And I know I'm a Sword and Sorcery writer, but I don't want to be known solely as a Sword and Sorcery writer. I'd rather be just adventure writer. But Sword and Sorcery is
yeah,
really my avenue. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. That's the thing I want
yeah,
to probably focus on the most.
yeah. No, totally. My mindset is like I guess the thriller genre in particular. That's kind of like what I'm known for, but I'm not afraid to jump into other genres as well and see what you know goes. Like I was really kind of surprised that when I wrote Night of the Vigilante, my first western. It's a quasi thriller slash western, so it ties into my universe. And I was kind of like well, I'm not sure how this is going to sell, but I'm going to put it out, and you know it's just there. It's now, ever since I published it like earlier this year, it's like been the book that has like made the most money since I first started like publishing. I have no idea how or why, but like it's sold well, and I'm happy. You know, am I going to pivot entirely? No, but like I think I'm changing up the genre and having like multiple genres that you write in and sometimes publish in is good too, because it tells readers, well, even if you don't like this genre, you might still like this author because they also write in this genre.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never written sci-fi. I really don't have a vested interest in sci-fi. Maybe if it was kind of like Halo, like an action sci-fi. One day I'll probably experiment with that though, because military sci-fi is a really big seller. Like people might want to try it, you know? If you don't like my fantasy,
Yeah,
sci-fi. I don't know.
I I I love reading sci-fi. The thing of it is like a lot of stuff that I would have written like in middle school that was sci-fi then is actually like reality
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, we have AI and face like what we're doing right now was impossible when I was a kid.
What's interesting is I went over like some of my notes for like when I wrote the first like initial draft of like John Ryder uses like an AI supercomputer to you know like locate information on bad to like hack into foreign databases or something like that. In the initial draft like of this is back in 2016, I have it scratched out and I have like nah, too science fiction. Fast forward to like 2023, there's ChatGPT, which it's just like that's just like a fraction of what the U.S. military
Yeah,
has at their disposal. So it's like it's interesting.
yeah, I feel you. It's hard. Sci-fi has always been hard. There's always more of a political commentary to sci-fi too, or a social commentary. Like you take
Yeah,
Planet of the Apes, it's like evolution versus religion, or Logan's Run, like dystopian tyranny, that kind of thing. Hunger Games. There's always that element to it, and I'm just really bad at that stuff. So I don't know. We'll see.
I mean the other thing too is when you're ready to write it, you'll know. Once you are like you'll be good at it. I never approach anything if I don't feel like I can't, you know, if I'm not in the right mindset to write it. But once I am, like, I'm usually good to go. I guess another question that I always like to ask guests is, what would you say your biggest success is as a writer, and then like, what's your biggest man? This sucks, or this is a challenge.
I don't know. I feel really happy and successful having been published, not just self-published, but having my work pass through an editor screening and make it. That's very affirming. Like an editor somewhere thinks that my work was worth publishing. That's super affirming for me. And hearing back from people like somebody in the Discord, one of the girls in the Discord read my novella, and the best thing she said was just, "I wish it had lasted longer because I was having so much fun." And
Yeah,
I'm like, that's what you want. You want people to, be sad that it's over because it was so much fun. My biggest struggle, the thing that I feel like biggest letdown last year, I started work on a 30,000 word novella set in the modern day featuring dinosaurs, kind of a cool modern take on the Lost World. Um, and it was based on some sense true events. In China, they found this sinkhole that opened up, and inside of the sinkhole is a perfectly preserved prehistoric forest, like plant species we'd never seen, all kinds of stuff. And I thought, what if that happened all over the world? And what if a team of researchers hired a survivalist because they've never been in an environment like that? And they go down into one of these sinkholes illegally. So there's high stakes already. Like if we get caught, we're in trouble. The government won't let anybody in here. We're in trouble. So they go down into the sinkhole to explore the forest, and once they get down there, there's dinosaurs. That's the premise. Cool premise, I think. Very cool. I'm a chapter and a half from finishing that book. I started it this time last year. I hate writing it. I hate writing it because it's modern day. I don't know what it is about me writing modern day. I prefer to write period pieces or fantasy. Something about writing modern day just bores me to tears. I can't. I hate it. I hate writing that book. I will finish it. Is it good? I don't think so. I doubt it. I have no confidence in this book at this point. I will finish it. I'll let people read it, and they will decide if it's even worth daring to try and publish somewhere. But I hate it. 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 It's just not fun anymore. And that's the big question is, if I'm not having fun doing it, why am I doing it? Right? So that's one of the biggest letdowns is you get 95% complete on a book and you just give up because it's like, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. There are other things I could be writing.
yeah, I get that. I've had that's why I kind of I don't know if you know him or if you know him well, but I'm sure you know who Zach James is.
Zach James.
In the Discord, he gave me a piece of I wouldn't really say writing advice, but when I was talking to him about like his writing process, he told me that he's working on 2 or 3 projects at any given time to publish. And at first I'm like, this guy is nuts. But when I asked him kind of why, he's kind of like, well, I don't want to get, he's like, well, I have a lot of different interests. And sometimes I get really into, a, he's like, I really get into one project and then sometimes I hit a wall or I just get bored with it. And rather than like have writer's block or just get stuck writing that, he's like, I have 2 other topics of interest that I'm interested in that I can be working on as well. So I'm like, huh, that's interesting. So I kind of started, um, you know, implementing that into my workflow. That's why like people are kind of like, man, Sam publishes a lot, like 2 or 3 times a year. That's why though, is because like, I don't just focus on one single
Yeah.
thing. I have different irons that kind of strike my fancy at different times.
Yeah, and I've learned that if I'm frustrated with the story, I need to take a break. I'll go write a short story and come back to it.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm in the middle of developing a novel that I want to write, and I'm really, really, really excited about it. But being a new father means that I only have so much time. So I'm not devoting
Yeah.
the sort of time to it that I want to devote. And I'm eventually going to have to. I promised several weeks ago to the Discord that I was going to start drafting it. And the night that I sat down to start drafting it, my kid had like a mind meltdown, and I had to,
Yeah.
and there's no tired like father tired. Dude,
Of course.
all you do is hold him all day, and you're more exhausted than working a 12-hour shift at a factory. I don't know what it is, but it just has not gotten off the ground yet. It will eventually. That's another
Yeah.
frustrating thing though, is projects you really want to write that you just cannot seem to get traction on.
I hear you. Well, that was kind of what, and I know you and I have talked kind of privately about this, but that was one of my biggest kind of that's kind of been one of my biggest frustrations. I just released, Sins of the Assassin, the 4th John writer book back in July. I've had it reviewed by, authors in the Discord and others on Twitter and Instagram. It's gotten like really good acclaim and it sold real well for like the past, it sold real well in July when it first came out, and then August sales just for whatever reason they just dropped off. I think I sold 3 copies, and I'm kind of like I spent a year, writing this 200, page novel, really like putting, a lot of effort into
Yeah.
it, more effort than I usually do on, on a novella. And sometimes like people aren't even seeing it on social media. And it's like, and I don't mean to complain, but it's like that's one of the things. Like you put a lot of effort into something and then you sell and it doesn't take off, as much as you hoped, or even
Yeah.
if at all. And meanwhile, you know, the the Night of the Vigilante, which I only spent like 8 months writing, it's like that one's selling like hotcakes, and it's like I didn't put nearly as much effort into it, but it's like, why is that one selling versus the one I literally like, you know, cried over sometimes, trying to, maybe not literally, but like,
Yeah, it's
like
always kind of a gamble, huh?
yeah. So I mean, and it's stuff like that. The other thing too is, yeah, so it's stuff like that. And you and I have talked at the marketing thing. It's ever changing. We both work in marketing. And that's always frustrating. And you and I are somewhat of experts on that. Also, that I think for me personally, like the other frustration I have, and it's not one that is like major, can kind of get grating, is like people don't realize that unless they're into like, reading books and whatnot, there's kind of the perception that we just sit down and write a story and publish it on Amazon, and because we had like, success, people just think it's easy, and so like, you know, they don't understand how much effort we put in, into our work, which can be frustrating.
First of all, if it's that easy, then everybody'd do it.
Right, exactly.
It's just not easy. It may come more naturally to some than others. For me to sit down and write a novella or a novel, I wrote my novel in like 16, 17, 18 days during NaNoWriMo, something like that. But you didn't see what I did the months before NaNoWriMo started, which was plot the heck out of that thing. I wrote down every detail just so that when I sat down to actually type the story, I didn't have to think about anything. It was all just ready to go. So that was a lot of work, And even then, like when I published this thing, my novella, I wrote this in like 2-3 weeks. I rewrote it in 2-3 weeks. I wrote it twice. That's not easy. But then I ran a Kickstarter on it. Man, I've never done more work in my life than on that stupid Kickstarter. I'm never going to do another Kickstarter. Forget that. Like, sure, I got to pay for it, and I got it edited, and like, I could, but no, like, forget that. I'll never do that again, because it was a pain in the neck just to get people to be interested in the Kickstarter, much less interested in the book. And sure, I ended up with a finished copy. The people that contributed to my Kickstarter campaign were super cool and super generous. It was so much work to do. From the time that I first wrote this in 2022 to the time I published it, it was 3 years almost.
Yeah.
So like, you think it's easy? There's nothing easy about it. And that's just an absurd notion, an absurd sentiment to say that something like this is easy.
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, like, props to you for doing the Kickstarter too, because like I remember when, you were doing it, and like my thing is like was like, wow, I'm glad that his Kickstarter like, was a success, because like I tried to start like a Patreon for my podcast like a few years ago, and just like nobody subscribe to like any of the bonus content, which like I don't necessarily like, I'm not mad, or anything, but it's like I guess there just wasn't that interest. So, like to do a Kickstarter, like the fact that you did it. The other thing though is like, I guess the other thing that annoys me is like people who are like, and I don't know if this has happened to you, but like I'll get friends who, or rather, I should say acquaintances who, they're friendly and they mean well, but they're like, hey, can you, can you give me a copy? Can you like give me a copy of your book? And I'm like, sure, go on, I'm like, here's the link, or if you have a copy, I'd be happy to, sign for you, or I've got like copies at home I can bring you. And they're like, well, I don't really have the money to, so I was hoping you could just give me one for old time's sake. And it's like I know that they mean well, but it's kind of like, well, I'm like, I'm not in it to make money. I'm not in this to make money, but at the same time, it's like, I'm not doing this for free either.
It's just a very disrespectful thing to see you write something. In my case, from 2022 to 2025, I've been trying to get that book out.
Yeah.
And I invested all that time and effort and energy and commitment to it. And you want it for free? It wasn't free for me to write this.
No. Yeah. And well, Well, and the other thing is like I think my books are like pretty reasonably, priced too. And I'm not the only author who goes, through this either. So this isn't just me complaining, but someone was like, you're charging $15 up from 12, and it's like, well, yeah, because inflation has gone up, and so like I don't think $15 is that much, and I'm not going to say this part out loud, but like for certain people, like I know that they spend more than $15 on coffee, on their coffee orders
Yeah.
every week. So it's like, you want us home. I get that you want to, that you say you want to support me, but do you really? That's why I want to.
Yeah.
And then the other thing too, but like I want to let people know, because they're like, well, you get books for free all the time from authors, and it's like, well, yeah, I do, but like that's because I'm doing, review, like Kyle Mills, New York Times bestseller, was on my show. He asked me if I wanted, a copy, to help like promote. I did not ask for this. He just sent it to me. But yet when his book came out, like I still bought a copy on Kindle because this was good. Check out Fade In, by the way. But like, I don't think a lot of people understand that, like, yeah, authors, the reason why we exchange, the reason why we get free books is because we're like peer reviewing with each other.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not, it's not, you know,
I don't just like them better than you. That's an associate, or a, what do you call it? I guess a collaborator.
yeah,
This is somebody who understands my craft, who
right.
is able to give me feedback. This isn't them getting a book for free. This is me getting another set of eyes on it so that they can analyze it for me. It's not the same.
Yeah, and and give me a blurb if they like it, and if they don't, tell me why, tell me why they don't,
Yeah.
like it. And sometimes it's warranted criticism, sometimes it's like they're like, yeah, this book is good, but it's not for me, which is fine too.
Perfectly fair.
But like, but that's better than just than the average Joe Schmo thinking, "Eh, Sam just gets books for free because you know because these authors are nice to him." It's like well it's like well it is nice that they're my friends and they are arguing, but like also it is a business thing kind of too. We're helping each other out. So and there are just a few things I just wish kind of the general public understood a little bit more, and that's one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Um, on the flip side, the camaraderie is awesome, especially in our little corner of the internet too.
Yeah, we have a really great community on the Men's Adventure Fiction Discord. I found them just by trolling YouTube and seeing the podcast and realized they had a Discord and joined in. And it's like, dude, I belong here. Like, these are my people. I've got some of these guys' phone numbers. I talk to them almost every day. And, I've gotten to meet super cool people like Brina Williamson. Awesome artist, awesome writer. I've met Luke Goodish. I've met Nathan Hummel. I met you. I met Jake. I've just met so many cool folks. And it hasn't been a toxic community. Mostly.
No.
We had a couple bumps in the road. A couple people came in that wanted to cause problems, and that was dealt with. But for the most part, it's just a really, really cool community that's really supportive of each other. And man, it's been a heck of a ride. I've enjoyed it immensely. The community you build as a writer is just awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, it really is. Like I think that's another thing that keeps me going too. Is like, there are other authors that with both positives and negatives, I can at least like talk to them like, I love this, or man, this aspect of writing is really giving me.
Did you hear that
You know,
motorcycle? Sorry.
I did. I guess John Ryder's coming to
That's right.
get you, or
He is.
something,
Probably going to
or
get beat up.
maybe or it's Brady. Maybe he's just upset
Brady?
at you.
He drove here from Arizona? I don't think so. Me
Come
and
on,
Brady, everybody thinks we're enemies. We're not enemies. Me and Brady are tight.
no,
We just like
I
to
know
heckle
you.
each other.
Yeah. Well, he likes to bust people's chops, so. But yeah, no, I mean it's that camaraderie that like the authors have with each other that's like really awesome. So
Yeah, we have a great community on the Men's Adventure Fiction Discord, and if your listeners, viewers, whatever, if they joined it, they get to talk to us. They get to see what our community is like. It's really, really cool. Yeah.
yeah, it really is. Well, what are your what are your upcoming projects, in the future?
Man. Okay, so I haven't updated my Instagram in a while, but I announced it on Instagram, and I even announced it on my Substack, which I haven't updated in a while because my hands are full of spit up and diapers. I have a new cologne, man. It's called Spit Up. It's great. It smells like spoiled milk. It's all I smell like anymore. But I have a new project coming up called When Shadows Fall, which is a quote that comes out of Dante's Inferno. So it's very
Yes.
layered, right? Basically, the premise of this book, it'll be a novel. I'm aiming for about 60,000 words. I'm really excited about it if I can just get it going, man. But the premise of this book, you ready for this?
Yeah, let's hear it.
It's like a historical fiction novel set in 1295 in medieval Italy. And we're going to take history, and we're going to take medieval theology and demonology, and we're going to treat all those tapestries with red-skinned demons and cloven-hoof demons and Dante's Inferno and Paradise Lost and all these ancient medieval perspectives on demons and the devil, and we're going to treat them hyper literally, and we're going to take our historical fiction and we're going to put those things together. So what I have is a story about a Knights Templar who's come back from the Crusades. He's living in a monastery, trying to sort through the craziness of what he experienced in the Crusade. And at some point, these red-skinned, cloven-hoofed demons are going to descend on the town. And it's going to be fast, like Robert E. Howard's Conan stories. It's going to be dark, 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 like dark fantasy. It's going to have like a realism to it, like historical fiction. And it's going to treat the way they saw the spiritual world in the Middle Ages like it's literal. So yeah, hell has 9 circles, and Satan's in the 9th circle, and it's icy on the 9th circle. Paradise Lost, yeah, Satan fell and he built a palace called Pandemonium in the depths of hell, and it's going to be a little bit of Faust. Satan's bound, so he sends out a Mephistopheles from Faust, and that's his ambassador on the earth. There's I found old witchcraft hunting manuals from the Middle Ages, so some of that's going to make it into the novel. We're using the Lords of Hell from a little pamphlet that got passed around in the Middle Ages called the Lanterns of Light. So like Satan has certain generals, and these are their names, and here's what they do. I'm trying to synthesize all of that into a comprehensive lore for medieval theology. And I've even read Aquinas. I've read Augustine. I've read the Rule of St. Benedict, the Rule of St. Augustine. I've read up on the Benedictine monks, the Franciscan monks. We're really bringing all the historical stuff together, even the stuff that's super bizarre, like, the sort of things that, like the way demons interacted with humans, like the way they possessed people. In the Middle Ages, all I'd have to do is tell you, Satan take you, and the devil would crawl in through your ear and you'd be possessed. Like, that kind of stuff. Bizarre to our modern eyes, but horrifying to a medieval audience. I'm taking it all, stirring it up into a big bowl, and telling a story with it as if it were factual. And what I'm really trying to do is reclaim what made that so scary for the Middle Ages, but I'm also trying to tell this really cool, high-octane, demon-slashing story at the same time. So if I can pull this off, this will be one of the coolest, most unique projects I've ever worked on that I haven't seen anything else quite like this anywhere out there. So if I can pull this off, it's going to be super cool. And I'm really hoping that it will be. So if I can
Yeah,
get it off.
I'm listening to you describe that, and again, like I'm not as much of a fantasy guy, as you are, but just like hearing that description, I'm like, okay, that's, that premise is something that would just grab my attention, right?
I mean, yeah, like I just want to take it all hyper literally, like an actual Grim Reaper with a scythe, and he's a skeleton with a black cloak, like all of that stuff. We're going to take it
That,
as
yeah,
literally as possible and present it to you in a way that's believable. And
that is awesome. Well, I know people are going to hear this, so I don't really, I would probably announce it anyway, but right now I'm kind of working on like an alternate history thing for Shadows of Deception. I'm actually I'm going to submit this to Veritas actually. But John Ryder, my main character, he comes from a line of you know Navy SEALs, and his dad has been referenced in the books, but his dad is also in the current timeline. His dad is dead, but his kind of these older Vietnam veterans and Cold Warriors are in the current books kind of as old men. But now I'm going back to kind of the 1980s, and specifically I'm going back to 1981, immediately after President Reagan's assassination
you're
attempt.
killing Reagan.
No, I'm not. I'm not necessarily killing him, but what I am doing is, after the Trump assassination attempt, I'll kind of be a behind the scenes thing. People started to really draw parallels, understandably, to the Reagan assassination attempt. And there was a conspiracy theory out there that well, I wouldn't really say it was even like a conspiracy theory in the way that we think, the way, but there were concerns, understandably, because of the height of the Cold War, that the Soviets, who did have like an illegal program, like it's it's been declassified that we had KGB people in the country in the Cold War. So what if this was actually a Soviet plot? And
Okay.
what if so Reagan, even though he does survive, he approaches James Ryder, the father, and is like, uh, we're going to tell people that Hinckley you know was the one, and he kind of might have been, but I'm gonna dive into the Soviet kind of theory that they may have been responsible. We're gonna get into MK Ultra, secret societies, kind of the whole deep state thing before it became a conspiracy.
That sounds exciting, man. I dig it.
So
I like
yeah,
alternate history stuff. I think that's
yeah. Well, the other thing too is I like the one thing that I guess I like kind of about like writing in the 1980s, specifically that time period, is it's modern enough to where like we have kind of, I guess, primitive computers back then. It's not like there's not like an over reliance versus like now it's like so and so can just hack into this computer terminal, and like it's like it's more like cloak and dagger. There's not as much like cyber warfare as like a convenient plot point. So
I feel you.
plus the 80s is just awesome as a time period. So
We really don't have enough
but
80s stuff, do we?
not as much. Although Call of Duty Cold War was pretty cool a few years ago.
I remember that. We had Wonder Woman do the 80s thing, but that was that was whatever.
Yeah, and that had such potential to be good too.
It really did. It had strong potential, but squandered.
Yeah, and I'm not even mad at Gal Gadot. She did good. I think everyone who was in the movie did okay. It was just the writing was.
Yeah. It needed another pass for sure.
Yeah. But anyway, man, well, thanks for coming on. And where can people, find you and chat you up?
You can find me on Instagram, GDS Storyteller. You can find me on Substack, Grayson D. Sullivan Storyteller. You can find me on the Men's Adventure Fiction Discord.
Yeah, and the other thing too is we're gonna be, you're the one who's kind of getting me into, role playing tabletop, so that
We'll be
should
doing a D&D session sometime, yeah.
Yeah, that'll be interesting as well. Looking forward to that. So, well, sir, I want to thank you for coming on. I know we talk often, but the conversation is just always fascinating, whether on or off air, and really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And go check out this man's books. Everyone will have your Amazon page and anything else you want links in the description. And happy Labor Days, everyone. And I'll see you folks for the live show on Wednesday night. But until then, take care and thanks for watching, folks.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.